domestic violence is one of those topics that, again, is something that we don't really talk about in our communities. You know, from my experiences, you know, working with young women, you know, working with young men, you know, domestic violence is always kind of that taboo subject. And it's not taboo in the sense that, you know, we have loads of statistics, we have loads of documentaries, you know, we have loads of campaigns and organizations that are, you know, engaging with, you know, both men and women. But what I'm talking about is sometimes I use the analogy of going back to ground zero, and ground zero is where the community's at. You know, in the community, how often and how frequent do we talk about domestic violence within households? You know, working with, you know, young women in particular, you know, this idea of, you know, being silent, being invisible, and also this kind of idea that, you know, men from the community that, you know, may be key stakeholders, may have a platform, you know, may have a voice. You know, why are we so silent about domestic violence? But we talk about knife crime, we talk about county lines, we talk about other forms of element and violence, but we don't talk about the impact of violence towards women within our communities. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had there because, you know, we're talking about also children and young people that are growing up in households where they're observing that violence. And especially from the young people that I've worked with, young men in particular, that have gone on to be involved in some form of violence or conflict, you know, investigating and researching some of this stuff. A lot of them talk about, you know, being in a household when they were children and they observed that domestic violence between their parents or between a family member or between siblings and their parents. And then I think there's another layer of that conversation as well, where we don't take the conversation as how domestic violence impacts men. You know, so it's interesting that when we talk about that taboo, you know, where are the spaces where men can come forward? You know, where are the avenues, where are the strategies and interventions that are visible within our communities that can enable men to come forward in that safe space to talk about the impact of domestic violence in their household? So I think that when we have these conversations, I think that we need to kind of bring it back to, as I've said, ground zero. We need to bring it back to the ground and really kind of have those conversations on what's happening in households and what's the ripple effect. And especially like we're talking about in the middle of a pandemic, you know, people are living on top of each other, people are stressed, people are anxious, you know, mental health and people's mental well-being is on the increase, you know, as a decline. And I think that some of those issues that exist within the household becomes quite intense. And we know some of the stark statistics of young women that are, I guess, impacted by some of the issues as it relates to, you know, violence within the household. But it would be interesting to see what the impact is also for men and what that looks like and what that means in terms of that ripple effect and how that impacts our children and young people.